Ron from Rhode Law, and in this video we're going to walk through a retail lease suitable for a shopping center, standalone. This can be for an anchored complex, but it's going to be a retail lease that has options for gross sales. You have sales reporting, you have percentage lease options. Watch this video if you need a retail lease and have questions about filling this out.
Hey everyone, Spencer Burton here. Allow me to introduce Ron Rhode. He is our A.CRE legal contributor, and he'll be sharing a walkthrough of one of his real estate legal documents.
All right, so in the beginning, it's all pretty standard, right? We have landlord information, landlord address. Another thing that we often add instead is a landlord address for payment. That can be different than legal notices. Just depends on how big you are as a landlord. If you have a lockbox type of location, tenant's address. Again, this can be for prior to a lease commencement possession. Otherwise, after possession, notices will go to the address. It all just has to be specified in the lease, but with national tenants, we see 16 different addresses. For smaller mom and pops, you can just send it straight to the tenant at the location. Trade name, it's really critical. I see a fair number of disputes where the tenant specifies a different trade name and then they want a different name on the sign, but if it's not in the lease, the landlord doesn't have any notice of what type of name you actually want to put on the building and no approval therefore. Guarantor, we're doing corporate guarantees, personal guarantees, doesn't matter. Landlord's agent versus cooperating agent. Usually you don't need to specify the amounts here. You just put the broker's name and their brokerage, and then it's usually subject to a separate written agreement. So the percentage or the amounts don't have to be in the lease, just that they're named as a broker. Description here, we maybe have a name or a nickname for it, the district here, Texas, but it's got to be further described on Exhibit A. Building, again, trade names, demise premises. This is where it's actually pretty important. What is the actual approximate square footage? You must use BOMA standards. I can't think of any other way because the landlord is really not dictating how you demise the space in terms of individual rooms. So they're not going to get dinged for too much interior walls. You're going to measure from the widths and the centers of the interior walls and the outside of all exterior walls. That's it. The tenant has access to all that space. They can cut it up and carve it up however they want. However, there still may be some discrepancies. So later on in the lease, we'll see some audit rights or some abilities to change because even though the landlord may think you're getting 3,000 square feet, when you actually measure according to these standards, it may be significantly less. It might be 2,800 square feet, in which case you would get a reduction in rent and all that for that magnitude. Commencement date. This is very complicated. I would really just recommend that you need to read this and understand what do you want. There's a lot of different ways to slice commencement date. It can be on possession, the earlier of opening, that sort of thing. Liquor license. So we may have a contingency that says the lease doesn't start until they obtain a liquor license because from the tenant's perspective, they can't generate any money and it could be a long delay for a liquor license. But that's up to every individual case. But we do see licensing for restaurants, bars, that sort of thing as saying, hey, we'll start paying rent as soon as we have our liquor license. Lease term and thereafter, 10 years. Pretty standard, I think 5 or 10 years for retail leases. We go through here and spell out the base rent. So we're going to be putting the rents in this column. Percentage rental rate. This one has it, but if you are not going to charge a percentage rate, you would just type in intentionally deleted. Minimum CAM charge, that's usually what landlords see. If you're drafting this from a tenant perspective, we'll usually put a maximum per month. Prepaid rent, none. This is for a security deposit. I'm not sure why it was intentionally deleted. Permitted use. What is the space zoned for? Provide a current C of O. These are just comments that we usually think of that the leasing agents will ask for. Initial, so this is your minimum rent, this is your CAM, this is your taxes and real estate charges, insurance, utilities. All these can be separated or they don't have to. You can just summarize all of the OPEX in addition to the base rent. So you have base rent and you have additional rent, and then you can have a total monthly. Delivery obligations, again, you have a range from landlord providing as is all the way to a turnkey finished shell. And so that's a really important concept. Is there are two choices, there's two categories. Who is going to perform the work and who is going to pay? And then for those two questions, there's two answers, either the tenant or the landlord. So either the tenant can perform the work and the landlord can pay. The tenant can perform the work and the tenant can pay. Or the landlord can perform the work and the tenant will pay, or the landlord can perform the work and the landlord will pay. So that's the matrix, the 4-box scenario that you just have to figure out what do you want, and then making sure your legal documents are matching and accurate to that. You may have a rent abatement. You may have a 1-for-1. I don't say this is a 2-for-1, but you may have a 1-for-1 rent abatement if the landlord fails to deliver within 30 days. And termination after 60 is pretty harsh. I think for all my landlord deals, I'm not going to give them a termination right just for a 60-day unless it's absolutely critical that they have to be in the space. Pretty standard language. Gross sales, we define gross sales because it's going to be in the tenant's interest to minimize that as much as possible, but the landlord wants to maximize. Sales reports auditing, again, if you have a reporting, most retail locations will have reporting requirements just to see the state of the health of the business. This is a tenant request, but we usually delete it if we're drafting for the landlord. Common areas, these are pretty standard definitions. Capital expenditures, this is important. We spend a lot of time on what is a common area maintenance charge and what is not a common area maintenance charge. So we may spend a lot of time defining those. So they're asked here, include standard operating expense exclusion. Use and care, one of the biggest things is whether the tenant has a right to self-help. Again, landlords don't want to allow the tenant to conduct repairs of themselves and offset their rent payments. Tenants obviously want to be able to fix things and deduct. Maintenance obligations, pretty standard. You just have to be clear about who is maintaining the HVAC, who is maintaining the windows, who is maintaining the roof, exterior, landscaping, that sort of thing, signage. So we have 48 hours. I think that one's kind of high. I think we do 24 hours. I think that's pretty reasonable for both sides. Pre-approved signage. So we just have an exhibit which has signage criteria. Utilities, this can be an interesting one because sometimes there are tap fees or charges that you have to pay in order to connect it, and it's a debate whether that's a landlord or a tenant responsibility. So as long as it's spelled out in the lease, there's no debate. Insurance. So one of the trickier things that I've dealt with is when you have larger tenants, they may start self-insuring, and you as a landlord are kind of thrown a curveball because when a tenant self-insures, it's harder to rate them and to create the standard. So you need to be clear that if they're self-insuring, what the lease obligations are for insurance. Waiver of liability, mutual subrogation. Again, please provide reciprocal. Most landlords will. I mean, if you're asking for indemnity for your actions, then you can provide it for the other side. Termination, this is pretty good. I think 270. I think 180 is a little bit tight. That's 6 months. This is 9 months. But again, everything's negotiation. 15%, then you can get some reduction. Otherwise, if it's 10%, you just keep going on with the lease. You may have an adjustment in the payments. SNDAs are very important. Check my other videos where I talk about SNDAs, but this is absolutely applicable, and it protects both the tenant, it protects the landlord, the lender. Everybody benefits from having a well thought out SNDA. What is this section? Tenant default, lots in there. Landlord's security interest, holding over. So we have this commission, remediation of hazardous materials, OFAC. Again, just the laws governing. And that's it. I think that it's a short lease. I don't have the exhibits on here, but I'll go ahead and attach them in the free download. But that's it for a retail lease. This is a good quality landlord friendly lease. And if you have questions, feel free to drop a comment or shoot me an email. Ron from Ron Ready Law.